Hello, I'm Scott Carlson, a senior writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education, where I explore where higher education is headed. Welcome to this webinar on the high-stakes game of freedom to learn. Do the liberal arts hold a winning hand? We're here to talk about the utility and power of the liberal arts at a time when the liberal arts are under fire. Declining enrollment, shrinking resources, and skepticism about the return on investment have put the humanities, arts, and social sciences on the defensive. But are we missing the point of what the liberal arts are for and what they can lead to? Without a solid foundation in the liberal arts, can colleges and universities deliver what today's AI-driven economy truly needs? Before I introduce our guests, I want to offer thanks to Alt Liberal Arts, which produced this lecture. Alt Liberal Arts is a global education initiative concerned with the freedom to learn, civic engagement, and the advancement of the liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Global Higher Education Alliance for the 21st Century, known as GIA 21, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures and courses for which you can register at altliberalarts.org. These lectures would not be possible without the support from the Open Society Foundation. We look forward to discussing many of your questions as time allows with our panelists who are joining us on screen now. You may enter your questions in the Q&A at any time. With that stage set for our discussion, I would like to welcome our panelists, Dr. Ned Scott Laff, Dr. Daniel Chambliss, and Mary Ruiz. I will begin with Dr. Ned Scott Laff, my co-author of Hacking College, Why the Major Doesn't Matter and What Really Does. Ned has over 35 years of experience in college and university settings, in administrative and faculty roles. He has broad interests in improving the quality of undergraduate education and revitalizing the liberal arts, with a special interest in the role mentoring plays in helping students design and integrate their educational, professional, and personal goals into a successful undergraduate education. Welcome, Ned.
Thanks, Scott.
Next, Dr. Daniel F. Chambliss is the Eugene M. Tobin Distinguished Professor of Sociology Emeritus at Hamilton College and co-author with his former student Chris Takacs of How College Works, published by Harvard University Press. He is also co-author with Russell Shute of Making Sense of the Social World, a research methods text currently in its 5th edition. Welcome, Dr. Chambliss. Finally, I welcome Mary L. Ruiz, Chair of Alt Liberal Arts and sponsor of the 5 Disruptive Principles of the Liberal Arts Project. Mary is CEO of Ruiz Strategic Advisors, a management consultancy specializing in strategic planning for growth. She's a senior healthcare chief executive officer, chief strategy officer, and a respected leader in imparting public behavioral health policy. She's a past chair of the New College Board of Trustees and the founding president of the New College Alumni Association. Welcome, Mary. And thank you all.
Sound really good, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to remind our audience that we'll be taking your questions very soon. You can enter that in the Q&A. I want to begin this discussion, which probably will take roughly 4 parts, but we want to begin our discussion with an exploration of what the fundamental problems here. Why are the liberal arts in trouble? And one question I just want to ask, just as sort of a founding question here, is, do we just not understand what the liberal arts are all about, what they're for? Do we have a mistaken idea of what they are? Dan, can I start with you on that question?
Yeah, sure. I think the basic problem that people deal with is they feel like liberal arts just aren't immediately applicable to the job market. And that betrays a basic distinction between, let's call it vocational education and liberal arts education, which is really how concrete the skills and knowledge are, how immediately applicable. Let me give you 2 quick examples I thought of. Let's say you want to become an HR professional of some sort, right? You could go into a business program and major in the HR track and learn templates about how to deal with, for instance, difficult employees, and how, if you have to lay somebody off, how you go about doing that. And they'll give you algorithms, more or less, for doing that. And that's great. And you could apply them the day you got out of college. If you go the liberal arts track, you might have a psychology major where you talk about things like how people deal with anger and disappointment and frustration and grief and anxiety and things of that sort. So you're kind of dealing with the same issues, but at a much more general scale. less directly applicable to a specific situation. Let me give one other quick example. Let's say you want to go into the military, you want to be a soldier or airman or something. And there are two ways of doing that. One is you could go down to the recruiting station and enlist. You go to boot camp, 10 weeks later, you're good to go. 6 months later, you're a specialist and you can really do some valuable things. Or you could take the liberal arts track, go to West Point, and all the national academies are considered liberal arts schools because they are. You'd study history and philosophy and literature and a lot of mathematics. And along the way, you'd also get specific military training. But it's the feeling of the Defense Department that military leaders need to have a broad view of the issues they're going to be dealing with and be prepared for that. And so I think that the trade-off is between a more short-term, very clear, definite payoff and a longer-term approach to the issues.
So the question there is whether students are made aware of what those two options are and what the payoff is in either of those options. And so where do you think, I want to just turn to you quickly once more, just where do you think that gap is? And then I'm going to turn to Ned to get his take on it.
The fundamental problem is a lot of people don't see that there's a long-term payoff in the liberal arts approach, or they literally can't afford to take it because it does. It's a matter of years of training as opposed to something that's quicker, that's more a kind of one-to-one connection with a job. Abstract learning is a fine thing if you can afford to do it. Afford in the sense of time and money.
Yeah. Ned, where do you think the gaps are in terms of?
I'm fully in line with what Dan's talking about, but from my perspective, a big part of the gap is that we simply do not explain to students at all what the nature of an undergraduate education is about. So when we talk about a liberal arts major, when we talk about any major, right? Any majors maybe about one third of the hours students take. What do you do with the rest? So for instance, when you're talking about the psychology major wanting to go into HR, there's 100 different ways where that psychology major can put together different course clusterings in the blank spaces on their degree audit. And all of a sudden, they're coming out with HR experience. They could put together experiential opportunities even on their campus in the HR department and come out just focused in psychology, or they could be in sociology. But my favorite one right now are the foreign languages for 100 different reasons. But let me give you an example. Stritch School of Medicine at Loyola University, I think this is last year's data, 86% of the students who were admitted into med school spoke 2 or more foreign languages. Now, the importance of this is what's not explained to students. When you're sitting in a waiting room and you are hearing 30 different languages being spoken, who is going to be telling students that you're hearing 30 different cultural problems in the delivery of healthcare? And how that can come together in putting together a pre-med program that would make you more attractive to medical school admissions committees. So part of the problem in my mind is not what's going on in the liberal arts, what the faculty are doing. It's how we, these different spaces on campus, talk to students about the power of the liberal arts, and that there is no distinction. There's no either or between vocational and non-vocational. The liberal arts is a powerhouse for preparing students for the wicked problems that we're dealing with day to day.
Mary, from an employer's perspective, this understanding of what the liberal arts is and what kind of power it holds, certainly some corporate leaders get it, right? But do you think there's also sort of a knowledge gap or a translation gap? Like, what would we do with a philosophy major at this company? What would we do with a history major at this company?
I think corporate America is less confused.
Really?
Than the parents and the students, because we know what we need. We need people who can manage change, who can take on complex situations and not be intimidated by it, who can communicate clearly, who are analytical thinkers, collaborators, leaders, and willing to jump in the fray. And frankly, when I was looking for managers, I didn't care what degree they had.
Mhm.
I didn't care what degree they had. I cared how they translated that into those qualities that I just enumerated. And I think from a corporate perspective, if I were going to analyze the liberal arts problems as a CEO, I would say that my brand of liberal arts has been dragged through the mud by my competitors or my detractors. And my people are starting to believe the bad press. And so the liberal arts has always been preparation for life, preparation for work, preparation for contributing to society. It is the favored, as Dan mentioned, the favored way of training our military leadership. And I believe I saw a study, it's 10 years old, but there was a disproportionate share of CEOs who were liberal arts majors, myself included. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, what's our crisis management going to be in response to our brand being smeared by people who don't mean well? And there are problems with that brand being smeared, not only for us, but for the people who are being denied a future with more opportunities if they pursue the liberal arts.
And so just to follow up with you for a moment, that smearing, is it around the liberal arts don't deliver the skills? Is it around the liberal arts are for liberals? Is it around the liberal arts, what do you do? Tell me what that smearing is all about.
Well, I think they're grabbing at every handle that they can. You hear it all. That it's elitist, that these students are clueless when they come out, that they can only, work at McDonald's and serve French fries. It's, when you're doing a smear, anything that sticks, you'll throw out there. So I think it's not a targeted strategy. I think it is a shotgun strategy. And one of my concerns and one of my questions is, do we think that people in education might at some point think maybe there's a point to this misinformation and mischaracterization? Maybe we're not feeling as secure and as confident about our belief in the liberal arts. That worries me.
So much of this boils down to this sort of question about skills, and then how you engage with the liberal arts as part of like picking up those skills. And so Dan, as you were kind of pointing out, it sort of depends. Both you and Ed sort of have pointed out, it sort of depends on your engagement with these disciplines, whether you're going to pick up some of the skills that we're talking about here. And it's each individual person sort of bringing a different context to that history course, that literature course. Does this make it sort of more difficult to tell that translation story about what you're getting out of this, in a sense?
You mean because it's really more about the students than about what they're studying? Is that your point?
It's about that human development, and humans are individuals,
Yeah, yeah. I guess I would say two things. One is that the individual student is going to tend to go towards stuff they're interested in, right? But one of the great things about liberal arts disciplines is they tend to focus on the same kind of fundamental skills that apply in all sorts of fields. So if you study history, a lot of what you do is try to figure out, how do we learn about the past? How do you know what was real and what isn't real? The same is true in sociology. You try to figure out, why do different groups of people act in different ways? And how do you learn that? How do you find out? And those research techniques are going to be the same across a lot of different disciplines. And so the skills themselves are fairly broad-based. And the particular content may be a vehicle for a lot of students.
I mean, I think one of the issues here, and Ned, I'd like you to speak to this and maybe in conversation with some of the other panelists, but one of the issues here is some maybe this is not as much of an issue these days, but it could be just sort of this issue of what the liberal arts is supposed to be for within the academy, and this sort of discomfort with connecting it to to the work world outside. This discomfort we're seeing in that sort of utilitarian way. Ned, can you go into that a little bit, just talking about where you think that's coming from, and then
you're raising a real interesting point, because the way I have been seeing this is, we've created this either or. There are the vocational majors, or there are the liberal arts, or as Corey Moss-Pesch said, there are the practical arts and the liberal arts. And the practical arts will get you these conveyor belt internships, and they'll get you these great jobs. But in each instance, they're not talking about how a student can craft a degree around the liberal arts that is both vocational and practical and challenging students to test their thinking against the thinking of others and looking at the interesting problems, the wicked problems that they're facing every day. And this is where the beauty of the liberal arts comes in. We have a degree is roughly 120 hours. What do you do with those 120 hours? How do you weave this together into an integrated undergraduate experience? So you can be a history major, right? And you're looking at issues of causality, you're looking at issues of tradition. How do you take those skills when you tie it in with something like courses out of sociology and then courses out of, say, a management minor, and then you're looking at a problem on why this business is not succeeding? So all of a sudden, these history skills become hardcore critical skills that can open up a perspective on looking at the issues in a way that somebody coming out with a business degree wouldn't even think about. And those can open the door that leads to success for an organization. We just do, and I want to make sure I'm putting this in quotation marks. We do not do a good job explaining to students how this works. Employers, as Mary pointed out, get it, right? They get it when they see these kids coming on, and when they start talking to these kids in interviews. And these kids can put together, these students can put together these incredible experiential learning opportunities. They are just as marketable as these other majors if somebody, right, can help them figure this out. Now, I'm not putting the blame on faculty. I'm putting the blame on other parts of the university who are not sending the correct information about what the power of a liberal arts degree.
I wanted to return to Mary in a moment, but let me take it back to you, Daniel, for a minute. How did you talk to students about sociology? How do you make that connection to the outside world? How do you show them the various paths?
Yeah, well, an obvious example would be, sociology is most of our time in sociology courses is spent talking about how different groups of people, different kinds of people respond to the same situation. Or why men and women see things differently would be an easy example, right? Or why, as Fitzgerald said, why the rich aren't like everybody else, how their life is different from the life of a middle-class person, different from the life of a poor person. And we talk about how those different groups see things differently. That's exactly what marketing is. You go out and you say, okay, we've got a car. And these people think of cars as a mode of transportation. And these people think of cars as a tool for their business. And these people think of cars as a status symbol. And these people think of cars as a toy. And those are somewhat overlapping, but actually quite distinct markets in a lot of ways, right? Marketing is all about figuring out how different groups of people respond to different things. That's an easy example of what sociology does. And so a lot of our kids actually go into that kind of field. But the general idea is applicable all over the place. I think a lot of the problem is that people don't understand what you really do in liberal arts study, what it actually entails. Like they think English departments, think if you're an English lit major, you're spending all your time memorizing book titles or something, rather than, no, you're discussing things like love and jealousy and hatred and disappointment. And so those are pretty generally applicable issues in life.
Yeah. And you're learning how to sort of take arguments, build them, but also take them apart too,
Well, that's what philosophy, for instance, does. You read really difficult arguments, try to take them apart, figure out what they're saying, and see where they've got strengths and weak. That's what lawyers do all day. That's
Well,
all they.
I mean, that's interesting. It's interesting what we're talking about here is these different disciplinary lenses. I mean, in English literature, what you do is you read something that may have a philosophical context and may have an economic context, whatever it is. And again, with that, you're sort of picking it apart, for the metaphors, for the analogies, for the symbolism, but also for what was the historical context, what was the, what's the philosophical context here. So I mean, yeah, it's a very complex process. I think part of the issue here is that it's that again, it's that gap from college into the workforce. How do those things actually apply? I think is where people have that issue. And Mary, I think often what the conversation among companies right now, and what I'm seeing among in hiring is this huge conversation around skills and the vocabulary of skills, right? Which starts to get away from the degrees in a sense. It also, in some senses, is a kind of replacement for degrees. Like we're gonna talk about skills instead of don't get your college degree, you just need skills. You know what I mean? So how do you feel about that kind of conversation?
Well, I think that it's a dead end, because one thing I know about change in a company is change will never end. And you need people who can respond to situations that are unprecedented, that we don't have any history or algorithm or skill set that we've conferred. And so you have to have people more facile in looking at ambiguous situations. And I'm not as willing to let the faculty off as Ned has graciously done, because I think part of it
Yes.
is, in terms of skills, it's code switching.
Hmm.
If I looked at a student resume, a recent graduate, and it said, I was Professor Chambliss's research assistant for his last book in sociology. And I would look at that and I go, tells me nothing. But if I code switched and said, I was the project leader for Dr. Chambliss's research of 4 other students,
Yep.
and did original research and co-authored articles with Dr. Chambliss, I know now you can lead, you can organize, you can think, you can write, and what you have to say is important. So I think the problem is that we need to be more facile. Faculty are trained in their subject areas. They're not always trained in pedagogy. And the new pedagogy is requiring this code switching. The skills are there, I promise you. And so to me, it's important that we can identify them. And you know who also has this problem? Military veterans.
How
Their
so?
training is excellent,
Mhm.
but they go out and they can't find jobs. Why? Because nobody helps them with the code switching. When I work with military people, they are strategic. They look at the mission. They see what assets and resources are required to get it done. They know how to work in a team. They are loyal. They follow orders. Give me those people. I'll take as many people as I can get. And so, but they don't know how to code switch either. So it's not unique to the liberal arts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think as a hiring organization, you're always just trying to you're sort of looking for these symbols or these codes or these signals that sort of tell you, what is this person going to be like? And I mean, I think this is one of the real challenges in hiring right now. How do we discern among all of these applicants who's really got what we need? And, for a lot of institutions, a lot of hiring organizations, they're using the major as that filtering thing, right? Along with the college degree.
But they're also looking for keywords,
Yes.
the code switch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The AI is looking for code words.
And in terms of not letting off, in terms of not letting off the faculty here, you would say that there needs to be more of this translation and maybe
Yes.
more of this acceptance that what we do is connected to broader life too. We're teaching you how to live, but also teaching
It's
you.
all about broader life.
Yeah.
That's what the liberal arts was originally for. It was to make you a person who could fully experience and contribute to life. That's the fundamentals. And we shouldn't forget it. We shouldn't be apologetic about it. But I also think that we have to ask, what is the motivation behind the smear job? Why are they doing that? And
So
they're
let's ask
doing it, in my estimation, not because the liberal arts are useless or the liberal arts are weak. It's because the liberal arts are powerful. You get a bunch of people trained in the liberal arts, they are not passive. They are not going to take untruths without questioning. They're not pliable. They're engaged and they'll have ideas of their own. They're difficult people when you're trying to manage perceptions into a narrow lane. And so I think they're after the liberal arts because they're afraid of us.
Well,
We're
I mean,
dangerous.
in,
Um,
in, in
because
Brave New
we
World,
think,
I mean, history is one of the first things to go in Brave New World, right? Along with literature and poetry and all the rest.
burn those books.
Yeah, yeah. So you bring up an interesting point, though, and I want to ask all three of you about this. If we're talking about like, what do you get out of the liberal arts? I think, for first generation low income students who have not had a college background, this is particularly powerful. Does anyone want to pick this up as a comment, Dan?
Well, as a first generation college student, I was desperate to go to college because I knew what no college looked like, and I knew what college looked like, and I didn't have the money. And so the things that I did to be able to go to college, because I knew that it meant a completely different life for me. And colleges are not always prepared to deal with the feelings of a first generation student. When I came back home, I didn't belong anymore.
Right.
I thought differently. My world had expanded. And then when I went back to college, do I really belong here? There are people whose parents were professors themselves. They've been to Europe. They are conversant with books I've never heard of. And so there's a disconnect there. The first generation student also typically has more responsibilities at home. So when I left home, they were pissed off because my services to the family were now missing. The work, the money, the time, the babysitting. It was very difficult for my family to have to step up to that because I was the eldest. So I think first generation students have a lot of challenges and they're not well managed when people come to college. I don't think they're well understood.
Yeah. And I think to some extent, maybe for low income students, given the conversation these days about the liberal arts, to some extent steered away from the liberal arts. Ned, can you talk
Well,
about?
and there's a reason for it. If people are telling you're assured to get a job if you do this, you're going to steer toward that because you don't have a safety net.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents didn't have money to give me for rent or a car, or there was no safety net. If I didn't make it, I was on the ground. And I think that we have to acknowledge that our first gen and our lower income students are working without a net. And so when they hear this misinformation about what a liberal arts is worth, and the kinds of careers you can have with it, they can't take the chance. They can't take the chance.
Ned, talk a little bit. I mean, our book focuses on low income students. So
Right.
talk a little bit about that, taking a chance, and talk a little bit too about, the pressures.
Right. Mary, I agree with everything you're saying about the pressures, but the last two schools that I tested the Hacking College at was all first generation, low income. One school was both a minority serving HSI. All the students we worked with through the centers that I put together came into the liberal arts because what they got out of the conversations was, here is where the power is in these programs. And here's how you can put together an academic program that meets your vocational interests, your hidden intellectualism, and can allow you to put together design, your field of study that goes around your best strengths and allows you to engage in a world in a variety of different ways. Plus, this is important because I want to use a term you brought up, be able to code switch. So you could work in a variety of different cultural settings, including going home and dealing with the realities of your family life, and still come out and land these incredible first positions and move forward. And all these students began to realize, for instance, in sociology, there's also statistics that they learn and sociological research and research methods. And all of a sudden, these are hardcore skills that they can take with them and apply with a different perspective to a problem that any organization is dealing with, right?
And let me tell
we
you,
yeah.
you'd be amazed how many of my graduates, my former students, have told me they are the experts on things like how to design and analyze a survey. It turns out people do surveys all the time.
Yes.
They have
Right.
no idea what they're doing. And all of a sudden, our kid becomes the expert right out of the
Ex-
gate. Yeah.
Exactly. And when Mary, when you're talking about that resume, right? My response is I'm still going to take some of the faculty, right? I have this thing about what I call the terminal associate professor that we could go into later on. But there is a group on campus who is supposed to be there and help students make this translation, right? And what I discovered is if you walk into a basic career services office, they're good if you're a business degree, an engineering major, something in data analytics. They can help you put together a resume that makes sense. But they can't sit down. They have a difficult time explaining what the power of a liberal arts degree is, the type of analytic skills they bring. Plus, if students are doing it right, and it does not take much for them to do it right, when they start to bring together course clusters around their interests into their liberal arts major, all of a sudden, hi, I'm an English major, but I'm capable of looking at these management situations in a different way. Plus, one of the things I've learned how to do is be able to manipulate the reader to buy the argument I'm making to management in a way that somebody else can't do. These are the things that come with liberal arts, right? But we don't help students translate that the way we could.
Yeah.
Right. And I think one of the experiences that helps students do that is the internship.
Yes.
That's where all the dots get connected. And that's where the faculty are important because they've got to help students find the internships and translate the experience of the internship into further scholarship. And again, for low income or first gen students, they have to be paid internships
Yeah.
because you have to work. You can't not work. And so taking on volunteer work is not something that's going to work for
Yeah, but even short of getting an internship, I think what Ned's talking about, you guys talk about in your book, is the idea of just literally meeting a few practitioners in the field. I mean, it's almost like, mom or dad comes to school kind of day. Actually meeting some people who do the kind of work you're interested in. Suddenly you discover there's all kinds of things out there. I mean, one of the most interesting studies I've seen recently was about lower income students, high school students. Most of them literally do not know any doctors or lawyers.
Yeah.
They don't know any, right? Many of them have never been outside of their hometown, much less gone somewhere, at any real distance. I mean, their exposure to the world is just stunningly limited. And so they have no idea of the opportunities that are out there. They have no idea of the different kind of careers that are available at all, much less what they actually entail. And so anything to help students get out, and that's what a liberal arts education by itself tries to do. You start reading different kinds of things. You discover there are different religions in the world, right? You discover that people have very different ideas about politics or economics or, whatever. And that all of that exposure, as Mary said, it just expands your world tremendously. And
Yes.
with that, part of your own sense of possibilities.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, that growth of cultural capital is what college is supposed to be all about. And the liberal arts in particular is very good at delivering that. How, how do you feel about sort of these issues as we're sort of winding up this part of the discussion where we've sort of moved into the discussion about what you actually get out of the liberal arts. How do you feel about what you get out of the liberal arts in this moment of AI? Like what AI does to the liberal arts or what the liberal arts do to AI? Dan, do you have any thoughts about that, Mary?
Well, yeah, AI is going to eat any job that can be reduced to an algorithm. Right?
Yes.
However, jobs or tasks or activities that involve judgments and making judgments or setting an agenda or organizing people, not so easy for AI to take that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think Mary would speak to the flexibility of liberal arts background, that it gives you a lot of options, a lot of different directions you can go in. So you're live to the opportunities and you see, oh, well, this opportunity, this direction is shut down. I can go this way instead.
Yeah,
Mary?
I'm
And that's going to be
concerned.
crucial.
Yeah, I'm very concerned that AI is going to accelerate a trend that I think is already happening when you're directing students to more transactional kinds of learning. You know, you're taking pre-law to be a lawyer. You're taking accounting or business or very transactional kinds of things. You're going to become obsolete in the future, or your job will be much limited, or there'll be fewer jobs for those people. And so I'm concerned that we're actually directing students into a place that's a dead end. And the liberal arts, I see administrators in colleges divesting from languages. I paid my staff who were bilingual an extra stipend above their base salary because they were bilingual. They were more valuable. And so that's exactly what you need in today's world, are the languages. People need to be able to communicate. AI is not going to be able to generate new content. It's going to mine old content. So when things change, if there's a disruptive element in a business where all the bets are off and all the old things are obsolete, you have to have people who are generative, who can take on the new opportunities and figure out how to make it work in the future. And you know, AI is not all bad. It's a tool that can be used by creatives. I mean, I have friends in the creative fields who are now toying with it and trying to see, well, how can it enhance their work? But I think that I've never liked narrowing people's career opportunities into more transactional kinds of fields, because I know how endangered that is and how quickly it becomes obsolete. And I'm really worried about it now that we have AI on the scene.
Yeah.
Mary, I'd like to build off something you said, generative. One of the things that I've been looking at is, and this is inherent, it's just part and parcel of the liberal arts, the unexpected turn of a phrase. You could be reading something in the liberal arts, and this happens to me literally every day, whether it's I'm reading philosophy or literature or sociology. All of a sudden, there is an unexpected turn of the phrase in what somebody writes. And all of a sudden, the light bulb goes on, and I have a new way of looking at a problem that I've been trying to work out and find a completely unexpected solution I would have never thought about before. AI can't do that. It doesn't, there's a difference between extracting main points and being able to catch a phrase that AI would never even think about, right? It's not a main point. It's just a phrase. And all of a sudden it opens up possibilities that a student or a manager or somebody who's out there working on a problem would have never thought about. It's an unexpected solution. This is the liberal arts. And the other thing I want to emphasize, this is a big thing for me. This is as much aesthetic as it is logical. And my bigger argument is it's the power of the aesthetic in the liberal arts that makes it AI proof. That I would love, Dan, I would love to hear you go off on this one.
Oh, gosh.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I'm no esthetician. I think you're correct. I'll just say that.
Yeah. It's
But
that,
what people learn in the arts, of course, is how to look at things differently. I mean,
Yes.
literally how to look at things differently, and then how to project that vision to somebody else. And that's an immensely creative form of communication.
and how to
And I,
synthesize
Yes.
with meaning too, I think is a big
yeah,
part, right? Yeah. Yeah. Let's get to the part of the discussion here where this is part three, where we discuss what do we do about all this, right? What are some practical solutions that we would recommend of colleges and universities, and how to tackle this problem? So, you know, we talked about this narrative for students, this, the blinders that are on students. Maybe there's an issue there with faculty. Do we want to blame them or not? Do we want to put it on the backs of parents or students, or do we want to put it on workplaces in terms of making that translation? Dan, let me start with you. Where would you say we ought to go at this a little bit? What would be a
well,
solution?
two different kinds of answers we've already touched a little on. Was one is with faculty, you, a professor, you need to show the students the relevance of what you're doing all the time, of how you're having some discussion about Max Weber's theory of, the Protestant ethic and the rise of capitalism and so on. You've got to show them how this is directly relevant to their daily lives. And it is. I mean, all of this stuff, the classic stuff you read in a liberal arts program is all relevant. That's why it's classic. People can keep coming back to it, but you have to help the students make those connections and do that pretty explicitly. And again, second thing is, as Ned and you say, getting students in contact with real life practitioners of any field is a valuable thing. I think, for instance, I used to send students out just to interview people, as practice in interviewing. And I said, find somebody who's doing some job somewhere and talk with them. And they always would come back with, I didn't know this thing even existed, or I didn't think it involved that. They actually spend most of their time doing this other thing. And they start getting the notion that the world is a much richer place than they thought. And there might be applications for things they're good at that are out there. So those are two kinds of things.
Ned, I want to go to you next before I go over to Mary, but could you talk a little bit, you talk about change, we talk about changing the conversations in Hacking College, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so there is a conversation that faculty need to have with students. What's the relevance of all this? But then there's all this support around faculty, around, in advising and career services. How do those conversations need to change?
They need to change dramatically. It's not unusual for me, and this is on many campuses that I've been looking at and individuals I've been working with. Most of the time, these frontline people who are talking with students, they don't even know their faculty by field of study specialty. So, for instance, there are no generic sociologists, there are no generic English, there's no generic history. There are people with field of study specialties, and these faculty are multidisciplinary themselves. And so what these frontline workers should do is they should do a walkabout. They should walk into places on campus they've never been before, knock on the door, sit down and talk to people and find out what they actually do, what they're really about. So for instance, that person who's teaching intro to sociology could be somebody who's interested in the sociology of sports. But that's not visible when you just see a title, professor of sociology. The same thing is true with
I just
English.
have
The
to
same,
say that Dr. Chambliss is one of those
Funny
sociologists
you bring that up.
and
yeah,
wrote
funny I
and
bring
wrote the
that up,
book
right?
on Olympic swimmers.
Yeah.
Right, right. And so, well, Theo Epstein, right, wasn't he American history, American studies at Yale, and broke the two largest losing streaks of World Series in history, Boston and the Chicago Cubs. And nobody talks about he did it because he was in American studies, and that gave him the historical context to figure out how to change the game. Students need to have conversations that open them up to the wealth, and I mean the absolute wealth that's on a college campus, both with faculty, with staff, in places they would never think about. On one campus, my dean of students had an NPR radio show on golf, and none of the students knew it. And as soon as a group of students found out, he was surrounded by people like, let's talk about this. How do you see it? How do you do this in the radio station? All of these things are possible on campus. The place where this can start is during orientation. It could start with academic advising. It could start with somebody challenging students to explore the place that they're at.
Um, Before I turn to Mary for what the corporate world should be doing, I just want to remind everyone, please submit some questions. We're going to get to your questions very shortly. Have a conversation with us. We're here to talk with you. Mary, if we're talking about what are some of the things that we can do about this gap, about this translation problem, what can employers bring to the table?
I think that employers can help with connecting the dots because while we want people who can think and write and problem solve, all the classic results of a good liberal arts education, usually what gets you in the door is something more modest. Maybe it's because you have a facility with a certain software, or you know how to work a Bloomberg terminal, or you have a certification. And these are things that can easily be acquired by students to get their resume up to the top of the pile. And so I think these sort of base level credentials that employers can be clear about what they're looking for. And more and more colleges are offering it. Florida Gulf Coast University offers badges in various skill specific. It's not a credit thing. It's something to build your resume. And so I think employers can help by dialoguing with schools what that entry level ladder rung looks like. Because once you're past that, that's where the liberal arts helps you advance in your career. And I think that one of the things employers can emphasize is we don't feel that a liberal arts education will ever be obsolete. We think that's what's going to bring us into the future. And so if I were going to change marketing for liberal arts colleges, I would say, come here for an education that will never be obsolete. And I'll tell you what, the vocational degrees cannot say that. Because once you learn how to be a plumber or electrician, you're keeping up with the trade by on-the-job training. The training that you got is obsolete. And if you're not offered that in that job, you're not going to progress in the career. So I think employers can help by helping to create that bottom rung, by offering the internships and the shadowing and coming on campus and talking about what they do. I think we can help by being in a better relationship with the academic institutions.
I mean, that bottom rung is a huge issue, Mary, because for a couple of reasons. One is because of sort of the lack of what Corey Moss Petch had called those conveyor belt internships for liberal arts graduates that lead them into the job world. That being the first thing. The second thing being that the fact that AI is knocking out all of these sort of like entry level menial jobs that was often a step in the door that allowed a person to then work their way up the ladder. So that this more intentional relationship that companies need to have with colleges and universities to say, okay, now we're gonna create places, we're gonna re-embrace our role as first level trainers once out of college. How difficult is that conversation to get started though?
I think that because they're different worlds and different cultures, and everybody's busy, it's hard to do. But one department in the college that can help facilitate that, and in fact does, where it works well, are the advisors. They're inviting the employers on campus. They're linking them to the faculty. The advisors are really key. And I think that's something where schools really need to focus on developing that expertise and that capacity. because faculty don't have time to call corporate people and arrange a, they need some help.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get to a sort of section of the conversation where in a moment, where we talk about, what happens, where are we going from here? But before I get to that, I do want to remind everyone, please send in some questions. Let's have a conversation about this issue. But I wanted to bring in one question that had already been asked. That was from Douglas out there. Would it help to encourage professors to spend time in companies uh, to build contracts for their students, and to learn how to code switch and share that with their students? So I've heard about this before, in a sense that, like, you could spend your sabbatical sort of out there in the world, in a sense, like, or spend some time, or sort of get a break from your teaching uh, duties part-time, to sort of to spend time in that world a little bit. What do you think about that, Dan, Ned?
Well, I think it's like what Ned was talking about earlier, is that it turns out some professor has some side gig of some sort, or a hobby even, and they learn a lot. And once they can share that with people, when they start sharing that with people on campus, it sort of multiplies the learning, you might say. In my own experience, I spent some pretty good time doing management consulting work on the side. And that was incredibly helpful to my students, because I could come in with real world stories about, I was working for this big firm in London, and they had this big survey project, and they thought, they had too many questions, and we boiled it down and we refined it a bit, and then we did this and then, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you mean people actually do this sort of thing for a living?" I said, "You can make very good money doing this sort of thing for a living." And it's having that, again, that sort of real world grounding, beyond the academic, is quite valuable.
Yeah.
And if it's good for learning from the student perspective, one could assume it's good for learning from the faculty perspective. I ran a behavioral health hospital and outpatient practice. I would have done the Skippy-Doo if the social work teachers had come to me and said, "Could we spend time with you? Is there some project we could work on to better learn?" Because what they were teaching the students was transactional, and what they needed was far different. And I think if the faculty had seen what it looks like on the ground, what it looks like when you're facing a patient, what it looks like when you have to bill, that they would have been more helpful in guiding their students and understanding the full picture. So I certainly would have welcomed any professor who had an interest in learning more about my field.
That work-based learning is undoubtedly really valuable. What people often talk about, though, is that it's really hard to bridge that gap between academia and the company, that it often just doesn't work together very well. Can you talk a little bit about how we can make that smoother?
Well, I think we have to manage the expectations. If a social work professor had called me and said, "I'd like to come and shadow your counselors," sure, we'd love for you to learn more about us. If they called me and said, "I want to tell you how to run your counseling," no, because we don't think you're in touch. So I think that it's relationships. Businesses gather. Businesses have networking groups. Businesses have Tiger Bays. Businesses have associations, conferences, and those are all places where faculty can go and observe. We had in Florida, we have a statewide conference for behavioral health that has 1,000 practitioners, and professors would be more than welcome to come and learn and take the courses that we're taking for the field. So I think part of it is just being humble and inviting yourself to the table, and then learning how you can contribute. I think just starting low with, and faculty should be encouraging their students to do the same. Students should be going to these conferences, and there's often student rates, or students are comped, or there's student scholarships. And students could present with their faculty at these conferences. That would be another way. So kind of jumping on the train of how the field learns, since learning is what the students want and what the faculty offer, would be the place that I would recommend that faculty look.
Dan and Ned, either one of you, really quickly, I'm going to go to another question here in a second, but Are there challenges on the academic side of incorporating, sort of companies or the corporate side's issues, concerns, problems into your course materials?
One of the things I did, what I like to do is bring together unlikely combinations of people on campus. So I convinced, on one small liberal arts campus I was working on, I convinced the development office to create a speed dating. I'm using that in quotes, right? And it was like a breakfast. It was coffee and great pastries. We brought people from all over the major businesses and different organizations onto campus and faculty. And we got them together, and here's coffee and here's pastry. And all of a sudden, they started talking to each other. And then they started brainstorming about things and they started putting possibilities together. Then the development office began to see that there's things that could be called in kind that could really benefit the college and create opportunities for students. So there's lots of different ways to bring different groups together. They love to come to college campuses. They love to talk. And one of the things we forget is all of these people who are these executives and directors of their parents. And a lot of times they're frustrated parents because their kids don't listen to them. They have so much that they want to contribute, and all we have to do is bring them onto campus. At the University of Illinois, back in the day when I was working at Unit 1, I created a parents professionals program. We invited parents who were professionals in different fields. They'd live in the dorm for a weekend. We'd set them up with a series of classes. They'd do these workshops with students. They would be talking to faculty on campus. They had an incredible experience, and then they kept giving back to the students. So there's hundreds of different ways that we can make this work on a college campus.
Dan, before I turn it over to you, I just want to throw in Jennifer Wells's comment here. As a faculty member, the primary way I've learned about industry has been through moments of despair when I explored leaving higher ed. Short of having faculty professional development focused on helping faculty learn about and apply for industry jobs, quote unquote, how else might faculty learn about the employment world beyond academia? Dan, do you want to go talk a little bit about what I had asked, but then you could ask it.
Yeah. I was going to say, following Ned's point, is alumni and parents are the way to go with this, because anybody else has real serious time constraints, and alumni and parents will too, but at least they'll be sort of motivated and excited about helping the school and helping their kid and so on. So that strikes me as one of the easier ways of making those connections between practitioners and students, is the alumni and parent route. I'm sorry, Scott, your other point was
Jennifer's just sort of asking how can faculty learn about the employment world beyond sort of these moments when you get desperate and
when you need a job. I mean, that's pretty motivating. I don't know, but I would say one of the problems with all of these sorts of initiatives, of course, is time.
Right.
Very few people have just spare time to float out and do these things. And so you're going to have to figure ways that they can get the most bang for their buck. If you're going to spend a little bit of time getting to know people in the corporate world, let's say, how do you do that efficiently and in a way that really, where you can learn a lot quickly?
Right. And that's why I really recommend the conferences, because they're all there. They're in the halls. People are there to mingle. And one of the things that I would advise, and I used it as a student when I graduated, I was interested in different kinds of management, and I interviewed people in the field. Hi, I'm a recent graduate. I'm interested in your field. What does it take? What does it involve? What's it like? And people people who love their work are delighted to share it with you. And I think for a faculty member, you have a field. I happen to know Jennifer's is creative writing. So, interviewing different industries, how does writing play into your company, your needs? How is it being met? How is it not being met? You'll have an academic paper at the end of it, and maybe you'll have a job. I don't know, but I think using the skills you have as a learner and a teacher and trying to make those connections because business wants to share their needs and problems. And uh, I had very few staff who could write. And let me tell you what that meant. I had to do the writing.
Yeah.
CEOs do not have time to do the writing.
Mhm.
And the writing is really about the thinking. Jennifer, I would go interview some people and ask them what their needs are for writing. That'd be my suggestion.
But I'd like to take this in a slightly different direction. There is this whole world out there of the hidden job market, and it's everything. And it's all about imagination. I came back. I had a faculty member who was trying to build his minor in medieval studies. And I came back with all the job descriptions from all these independent and major game developers who were looking for people with background in medieval studies, mythology, or history because they wanted their headset in order to be able to create the storylines. Now, you would never think, right? You would never think like, hi, I'm doing my degree in medieval history and I'm going to do Forge of Empires for a living. One of the things that we need to think about as faculty is they are, we have to take advantage of other resources. Career services has to be more creative in going out there, getting information on all these things, and then translating it and bringing it back and sharing it with faculty, because that's their role on campus.
Yeah. I want to wrap this discussion up here with a final question that I want each of you to take on, and it's just a very open-ended question, but it is, if we continue going down this road, losing liberal arts disciplines at various colleges in Indiana, Utah, what have you, Florida, um, where do we go? Where do you see this winding up? What do you think is most at risk? Dan, do you want to go first? We can go Dan, Mary, Ned.
Well, yeah, well, the easy answer is we lose what we've been losing in the last 40 years, which is a focus on citizenship, let's say, being an engaged, good citizen. If you don't know anything about history, you don't understand why Ukraine and Russia have a big problem right now. And not knowing some of the same history, you don't quite get the Middle East and what the problems are there. And not knowing, the whole history of the 40s and 50s and 60s in the US, you don't understand what's going on with vaccines. And you can make some truly horrible decisions if you don't understand that sort of stuff. And by you, I mean as a voter, as a citizen, as an entrant into debates on these issues. If you don't know what's going on, you don't matter.
Right. Mary, do you have thoughts? Where are we going?
I think we're going to lose as a society and a business market our capacity to make things better. Because that generativity, that innovation, people who are willing to look at the same problems and come up with a different answer. In my field, people were doing mental health and people were doing addictions, and 2/3 of the clients had both problems. I spent a good part of my career tearing down those walls and bringing them together. And once people see the logic of it, they go, oh yeah, that's right. I don't know why we thought that way. We don't think that way. This has always been the way we should think. And so I think that we lose the opportunity to make society, medicine, business, you name it, any field is going to start to stagnate because the liberal arts graduates are the ones we've always relied on in business to come up with that new idea.
Yeah. Ned, final thoughts?
One of the one constant we have is change. And change is coming rapidly in so many different ways. And it's fearful. And one of the things you get from the liberal arts, right, is the ability to know that there is difference and then there's commonality. And that from difference, you can learn a whole bunch of different ways to negotiate this change. Instead of it looking at it fearful, it can be something that we can embrace and grow together. So difference difference, which seems to be a major issue right now, may not be that scary thing we think it is. It could be opening doors to new possibilities, but we need to come with a headset that allows us to think through this, to think about it and think with it as we come together to create a better society.
Well, I want to thank everyone for engaging in this conversation. It's been an honor for me to be part of it. And I want to thank the audience for joining us too and for submitting questions. Please check out all the other programming that Alt Liberal Arts is doing and hope to join you another time on this program. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks so much, Scott.